This is a really, really important question, and I suppose it relates to my first question, but it's to ask you in relation to what you're doing to ensure private providers of student accommodation would show decency and refund deposits and rent paid by students who no longer need accommodation due to changes in their timetable and time on the campus. I know the Students' Union of Ireland have continuously called for emergency protection for students such as this. Thank you.
Thanks to Deputy Conway-Walsh. So we already discussed in an earlier question, and you've rightly differentiated the two issues. We discussed what we're doing in relation to on-campus accommodation. I think we have a clear obligation in that regard for universities to provide refunds and flexible solutions on the likes. In relation to private providers, I mean, to be very clear, I urge all providers to be flexible in finding solutions given the extraordinary circumstances. This is not a normal year in which students find themselves. I do have to be truthful to the House. There are no powers available to me under the current legal framework to direct any particular course of action, and refund or cancellation policies in student accommodation should be set out in the licence agreement signed at the beginning of the academic year. So that is just the legal reality as of today. In the first instance, I'm advised that students should engage with their accommodation provider to see if an arrangement can be reached, and students do have access to the Residential Tenancies Board and the Dispute Resolution Service. I have asked my department, though, to continue to engage with the Department of Housing, because I know the Union of Students of Ireland had a meeting with the Minister for Housing in September, I believe, and I've asked my department to revert to me to see if there's any further developments or actions that we could take to try and assist students in this regard. But to be very clear, I think I agree with you in relation to people needing to do the decent thing, and I'll continue to engage with the Department of Housing in this regard.
Minister, a memo was brought to Cabinet to investigate banning evictions, as was done in the previous lockdown, but this is sorely needed and should never have been removed. It was needed even before COVID, but I'd ask the question, where is the same urgency when it comes to students? Students are in a unique position in the rental market, as they're often asked to pay months in advance, and I know that this runs into thousands upon thousands of euros for hard-pressed families and for students. When requesting refunds for unused accommodation, they are told that there's no protective legislation in place for student renters and they will not be entitled to their money back. This is not good enough, and successive governments have failed students and their families. There are some small-scale landlords that rent one property or even a room in their own home. Their ability to get by is important, but students and their families should not always be the ones shouldering the financial burden. Will the small-scale operations letting to students be able to access the COVID restrictions support scheme, the CRSS, if they let students out of the lease and give refunds? I think that's important as well. We cannot, Minister, we cannot just leave these students having paid thousands upon thousands to private landlords. We have to intervene. Thank you.
So I think you raise an interesting point in relation to the CRIS, and as you'll understand, it's well outside the remit of my department, but I will raise it with my colleague, the Minister for Finance, and I will revert to you on it, because my understanding is businesses who can't continue to operate or operate at restricted levels can obviously avail of this. I think you ask a fair point as to would those landlords fit into that category, so let me check that and revert to you. Look, what I've been focusing on trying to do is pull the levers that I have directly within my control, and we won't go through them all again, but the financial support scheme, the student assistance fund, the mental health, the educational disadvantage fund. So we've been trying to take as many different proactive ways we can come at trying to support students. We've taken very specific action in relation to campus-owned accommodation, university-owned accommodation. I accept that there is a group of students in relation to private accommodation where I've been honest with the House in relation to my legal powers. I've made it very clear what I'd like to see happen, and I am engaging with the Department of Housing to see if anything further can happen.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, government has to bear some responsibility for this in terms of the institutions, the late timetables, the late announcements. Students are struggling immensely, emotionally, financially and socially, and their anger and sense of injustice, they feel, is really palpable, and we're asking them to adhere to level 5 restrictions. We need to bring them with us. We need to show solidarity with them. Level 5 counts as use prevention. Surely that must mean we put in place measures to ensure that they are given fair play. We cannot be observers of this escalating situation. Government must step in with measures that ensure students get refunded for accommodation we are preventing them from using. It really is time to act, Minister. All higher level accommodation providers must be instructed and enabled to allow for leases to be terminated without incurring fees or penalties, and full refunds to be issued to those who request them. If this means emergency legislation, then this is what needs to be done here. The aggregate amount of money that's been handed over to landlords for something that students and families will never use is desperate.
Yeah, look, whilst I agree with a lot of the sentiment of what the Deputy has said, it's how we make these things happen is the challenges we have in government. So, I mean, we've tried to take all of the actions that we can take that are at our disposal in terms of how do you financially support students and their families, recognising that this has been a year of extraordinary challenge and a year that no student could have imagined. I don't think it's fair, not to be argumentative at this hour of the night, but I don't think it's particularly fair to suggest we've been slow or late in relation to the decision making. And I think when you look at other jurisdictions across the European Union and the likes, I think we moved swiftly in saying to students, actually we need to move on site, and I think students were very responsible in that regard as well. Had we not done that, I think we would have ended up in a much deeper difficulty for more students in relation to student accommodation. But I am absolutely committed to continuing to call out private landlords in terms of their responsibility here to do the right thing, to show the flexibility that I think is required, and to work with the Department of Housing. And I've already asked my officials to continue to engage with Housing to see if there's more that can be done in this space.